Listen carefully, because what you are about to hear is not a story about a man dying. It is a story about a man who turned his own death into the most devastating weapon he ever wielded. At 11:47 p.m. on a rain-soaked Tuesday night, Dominic Cross picked up a pen with hands that trembled not from fear, not from weakness, but from the cancer that had been eating him alive for 8 months. He signed his name. One final time. 41 years of absolute power. 41 years of silence and control, and a reputation so terrifying that grown men changed their walking routes to avoid being on the same street as him. All of it distilled into one signature. He set the pen down, looked at what he had written, and in that enormous cathedral-quiet study, surrounded by thousands of books and decades of decisions, Dominic Cross smiled. Not the smile of a dying man making peace with the world. The smile of a chess grandmaster who had just placed his final piece. Somewhere across the city, 4 people who had spent the last 2 years plotting his destruction were sleeping soundly, dreaming of the empire they were about to inherit. They had no idea. They had absolutely no idea that the dying man they had betrayed, deceived, and condemned had known everything for months and had used every single day of his dying to build a trap so intricate, so patient, so devastatingly complete that their greed had already locked them inside it. They just hadn't heard the door close yet. Backhand index pointing down if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or written off. This story is for you. Stay with it. Every chapter will hit harder than the last. Introduction: the weight of a name. There is a kind of man the world produces rarely. Not often enough to be commonplace, not rarely enough to be myth. A man who is so completely, so unnervingly in control of himself, of his environment, of the invisible architecture of cause and consequence, that even the people closest to him sometimes forget he is human. Forget that underneath the precision and the patience and the absolute composure, there is a body, there are feelings. There is, somewhere beneath all that granite stillness, a heart that can be broken. These are the men the world fears. And these are the men the world eventually tries to destroy. Dominic Cross had known, from the time he was 17 years old, and watching the way power moved through the broken streets of South Caro like water finding its level, that he would one day be that man. He had not wanted it the way boys want glory. He had wanted it the way a drowning person wants air, with the desperate, total clarity of someone who understands that the only alternative is going under. He had built his empire over 4 decades with a combination of ruthless intelligence and extraordinary patience. Not the patience of passivity, the patience of a man who understood that timing is the difference between victory and collapse, that the right move made too early is the same as the wrong move, that everything in the world of power is a matter of waiting until the moment is yours and then striking with total conviction. He had never lost. Not once, not in 41 years. Not even now. Especially not now. Because Dominic Cross, 63 years old, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 8 months from the diagnosis that would have broken any other man, was not losing. He was executing. The most complex, the most personal, the most dangerous operation of his entire life. And he was doing it alone. In the study of his estate in the hills above Caro, on the night he signed his will, the room held him like a secret. Walls lined with books, thousands of them, histories and philosophies and military strategies and the behavioral science of human nature. A desk of dark wood, worn smooth by decades of decisions. A single glass of bourbon, half full, catching the lamplight. The smell of candles and leather, and the faint medicinal sharpness that had become, in recent months, the signature scent of his own decline. On the desk, one cream envelope, sealed with black wax, beside it one photograph. The photograph showed a young woman, 26 years old, dark-eyed, laughing at something off-camera with the kind of completely unguarded joy that belongs only to people who don't know they're being watched. She had his jaw, his stillness, even in motion, his way of being entirely present in a moment. She didn't know he existed. She was about to inherit everything he had built. And everything he had built was about to be the instrument of justice so complete, so precisely calibrated to the nature of each betrayal, that the four people who believed they were hours away from victory would instead find themselves standing inside the ruins of everything they had schemed for, destroyed not by violence, not by war, but by the meticulous, patient genius of a dying man who had decided that his death would be his masterpiece. This is what it looks like when a lion, cornered and mortal and fully aware of both, decides to fight on his own terms. This is the story of Dominic Cross. The last chapter, written entirely in his hand. The diagnosis that didn't break HIM, it freed HIM. The day Dominic Cross was told he was dying, it rained. A November rain, not the soft, forgiving kind, but the hard, indifferent kind that hammered the windows of the private medical facility and turned the world outside into a gray, dissolving blur. The kind of rain that feels like the sky making an argument. Dr. Elaine Marsh sat across from him in a room that smelled of antiseptic and careful neutrality, and she told him the truth in the precise, clinical way that Dominic had always required from her. No softening, no theatrical pause, no reaching for his hand. Just the facts, delivered with the respect of one serious person to another. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, she said. The primary tumor has been present for at least 18 months, almost certainly longer. The spread to the liver is significant. The surrounding tissue involvement is, she paused, not from emotion, but from the precision of choosing the right word. Extensive. Dominic looked at her. His face was entirely still. Timeline, he said. 8 to 14 months, possibly fewer depending on the rate of progression over the coming weeks. She held his gaze. I want to be honest with you, the range reflects genuine uncertainty. At the aggressive end of the progression, we could be looking at 6 months. 6 months. Dominic Cross processed this the way he processed all critical information, without performance. He didn't go pale. He didn't look away. He didn't fill the silence with the reflexive protests or desperate questions that the word terminal typically produces in the people who receive it. He simply sat with the information, turned it over, examined it from every angle with the same quiet thoroughness he brought to everything. 6 to 14 months. His eyes moved briefly to the window, the rain hammering the glass, the city dissolving in gray light beyond it, and in that single, unguarded moment something moved across his face. Something that was not quite grief and not quite fear and not quite anger, but carried elements of all three. A flash of pure, unmediated human response to the news that you are going to die sooner than you thought, sooner than you were ready for. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it was gone. When he looked back at Dr. Marsh, he was completely composed. Cognitive function, he said. I need to know specifically what happens to mental clarity as the disease progresses. There will be periods of fatigue that affect concentration. As we move into the later stages, the pain management medications will create some cognitive softening, reduced sharpness, some memory fragmentation. In the final weeks, the effects become more pronounced. I need 6 months of full clarity, Dominic said. Uncompromised. I need to think clearly, read clearly, make decisions clearly for 6 months. He paused. After that, I don't care. Dr. Marsh looked at him carefully. Dominic. Find a way, Elaine. Not a request. Not quite an order. Something in between, the communication of an absolute necessity delivered to someone he trusted to meet it. Whatever protocol it requires, whatever combination of treatment and management achieves that, I need 6 months. She found a way. On the drive back to the estate, the armored car moved through the rain-soaked city like a dark fish through dark water, and Dominic Cross sat in the back and looked out at everything he had built, the territories, the businesses, the invisible architecture of influence and power woven through the city's bones. And he did something he had not done in a very long time. He thought about death. Not abstractly, not philosophically. He thought about his death, the specific reality of it, the timeline of it. The way it would reshape everything around it the moment it became known. He thought about the inner circle and what they would do when they learned. He thought about the organization and its thousands of dependencies, and what dissolution without a plan would mean for all of them. And then, somewhere on the bridge over the dark river, the thought shifted. It moved from this is the end to something else. To something colder and cleaner, and, if he was honest with himself, considerably more interesting. What if the diagnosis is not a limitation? What if it is a deadline? What if the 8 months between now and the end are not a countdown to defeat, but a runway? His driver, Asta, laconic, loyal, 22 years of complete trust, condensed into a man who knew when to speak and when not to, glanced in the rearview mirror. Their eyes met briefly in the glass. "Don't tell anyone," Dominic said. "I never tell anyone anything," Asta replied, the same tone he used for everything, calm as concrete. "Good man." They drove in silence. By the time the car pulled through the gates of the estate, the shift was complete. Dominic Cross had received his death sentence and spent the 40-minute drive home converting it into a strategy. He went to his study. He poured a bourbon he barely touched. He sat at his desk. He opened a fresh notebook, clean pages, dark cover, the kind he had used for 40 years of decisions. He wrote 3 words at the top of the first page. The final chapter. He underlined it once. Then, and this is the detail that matters, the detail that tells you everything about who this man was, he didn't write anything else that night. He thought. For 3 hours in perfect stillness, with the rain still working against the windows and the bourbon warming untouched in its glass, Dominic Cross sat and thought. He mapped the full territory of what he knew, the organization, its vulnerabilities, its dependencies, the inner circle, their ambitions, their weaknesses, their specific flavors of disloyalty, the external threats, the legal architecture, the human variables. He thought about what a man with 8 months and complete knowledge of his own betrayal could do if he was precise enough, if he was patient enough, if he was willing to do something that required a particular kind of extraordinary courage that had nothing to do with physical bravery. If he was willing to appear to lose completely, convincingly, over a sustained period of months, in order to win. At 2 in the morning, he picked up the pen. And he began to write. Everything that followed was in that notebook. The inner circle, 4 people, 4 knives. Power, Dominic Cross had always believed, is not destroyed by enemies. It is destroyed by the people you trusted, the people you promoted, the people you protected, the people you sat across from at dinner and gave pieces of your empire to, one by one, believing that shared interest was the same as loyalty, believing that gratitude lasted, believing that the people who had risen on your shoulders understood what the shoulders had cost. They never did. Not in history, not in politics, not in business, not in the world Dominic Cross inhabited, where the stakes were absolute and the consequences of misjudging a person's character were measured not in professional embarrassment but in graves. He had known this, he had always known this. And yet, he had trusted them anyway. Not completely. He was constitutionally incapable of complete trust, which was perhaps the one gift his childhood had given him. But enough to give them real power, enough to let them see his operations from the inside, enough that when they chose to betray him, they had the tools to do it effectively. That was his mistake, not the trust, the access. He sat with this in the weeks following the diagnosis, in the long, still mornings before the house woke up, reviewing everything he knew about each of them with the detached precision of a doctor reviewing test results. Not angry, not betrayed in the emotional sense, he had moved past that. Just clear. Sharply, surgically clear about what each of them had done and why and what it meant. Marcus Vale, 48 years old, underboss. 19 years with the organization, the last 6 in a position of real power. Physically imposing, 6'3", built like someone who had never stopped needing to be physically imposing, with a mind that was genuinely, frustratingly good. Dominic had promoted him precisely because Marcus was smart enough to run things, experienced enough to know the terrain, and Dominic had believed grateful enough to remain loyal. The gratitude had lasted about a decade. Then something had shifted. Dominic had watched it happen in real time and had told himself it was normal ambition, manageable ambition, the kind of forward-looking hunger that made a good underboss effective. He had been wrong. What was happening in Marcus wasn't normal ambition. It was the specific, corroding resentment of a man who believed he had already earned the throne and was simply waiting for the current occupant to stop hogging it. For the past 6 months, Marcus had been meeting with representatives of the Callaway Syndicate. Dominic had known about these meetings for 4 months. He had read the communications, tracked the logistics, assembled a complete picture of the arrangement Marcus was building, a transfer of Cross territory and operations to Callaway control, in exchange for Marcus retaining a management position in the new structure. A sale, a betrayal dressed as a strategic transition. He had said nothing. Not a word, not a look, not a single deviation from the normal rhythm of their interactions. He had sat across from Marcus at meetings and listened to his reports and given him direction and watched him, with those meetings running in the background like a second, hidden soundtrack, and he had felt nothing that could be called surprise. What he had felt was something closer to confirmation. The grim satisfaction of a man who has suspected something terrible and been proven right. Helena Voss, 51, financial architect. The woman who had built the intricate, multi-layered web of companies and accounts and legal structures that gave the Cross Empire its stability and its invisibility. She was, in purely intellectual terms, the person in the inner circle Dominic had respected most. She had a mind like a precision instrument, cold, exact, capable of holding enormous complexity without losing the thread. She had been stealing from him for 7 years. This was the number that still landed with a particular weight when Dominic examined it. 7 years. Not from last year. Not since he had gotten sick. Since long before any of it. Since the period when the organization was at its strongest, when there was no succession question, when there was no external pressure. 7 years of patient, architectural theft, building a shadow structure inside the legitimate one, bleeding the organization slowly and invisibly while managing it brilliantly enough that no one noticed the bleeding. He had found it on a Sunday. A habit, he reviewed the accounts every Sunday, had for 30 years, a discipline he maintained partly for security and partly because understanding your own money was basic dignity. He had been looking at a routine quarterly summary when a number had caught his eye. A small discrepancy. The kind a less attentive person would have dismissed as rounding or lag. He had pulled on that thread for 3 hours. By the end of those 3 hours, he had the outline of a structure that had taken Helena 7 years to build. He had stared at it for a very long time. He had closed the file and said absolutely nothing. Eamon Cho, 44, head of operations, the quietest member of the inner circle, the most functionally reliable, the least outwardly ambitious. Raymond ran the physical infrastructure of the organization with an unshowy competence that Dominic had valued enormously: supply chains, territories, personnel management, logistics. Raymond was not a visionary. He was the person who made sure the visionary's ideas actually happened. In the architecture of the organization, he was the load-bearing wall. He was also, for 3 years, an informant for the Callaway Syndicate. Not by choice. This distinction mattered to Dominic, though he was honest with himself about the limits of how much it could matter. Raymond's gambling addiction had developed slowly and then catastrophically, the pattern of all addictions, until his debts had reached a level that made him vulnerable. The Callaway organization had found that vulnerability and applied pressure with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. Raymond had complied. He had been providing operational intelligence, supply routes, territory boundaries, personnel movements for 3 years. He was not, Dominic had concluded, a genuinely disloyal man. He was a frightened one, which was in some ways a more tragic thing. Father Eli Cross, 59, Dominic's younger brother, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, possessed of a natural warmth and a pulpit charisma that filled his large Northern District church every Sunday. A man who did genuine good in the community, charitable works, pastoral care, a quiet but effective advocacy for the poorest residents of the neighborhoods that had once been home to both brothers. A man who had for 2 years been quietly positioning himself as the respectable public face of a post-Dominic Caro, meeting with politicians, building relationships with civic leaders, allowing himself to be understood in careful, deniable conversations, as someone who could provide a bridge between the legitimate world and whatever structure would exist after his brother's death. Someone who could ensure a smooth transition. Someone useful to people who wanted the Cross Empire dismantled, but didn't want the mess that dismantling it would normally create. Someone who had agreed, through intermediaries, to serve as cover for exactly the transition Marcus and Callaway were planning. This was the one that had required the most time to absorb. Dominic was not a man who permitted himself the luxury of prolonged emotional response to anything. It was a discipline he had practiced since he was a teenager in a neighborhood where emotional response was a vulnerability you couldn't afford. But the knowledge of Eli's involvement had sat in his chest for weeks with a specific, dense weight that the cancer couldn't compete with. Eli, his little brother, the boy he had kept deliberately distant from the worst of what he built, needing to believe, that some part of his family could remain clean. The man he had sent to seminary school and funded and protected and maintained a fierce, silent love for through 4 decades of growing distance. Not clean, never clean. Just cleaner than Dominic, and using that cleanliness as a strategic asset. He had spent 2 weeks with that knowledge before he could look at Eli across a dinner table without feeling it. Then he had put it where it needed to go, into the plan, and he had looked at Eli across dinner tables for months without showing a thing. These were his 4. This was his inner circle. And now, sitting in his study with the notebook open in front of him and the bourbon going warm beside him, Dominic Cross understood something with complete, devastating clarity. Each of them had handed him exactly what he needed. Their ambition, their greed, their fear, their specific individual brands of betrayal. Every move they had made against him, every meeting, every transfer, every whispered arrangement was a thread. And Dominic Cross, who had spent 41 years learning how power worked and how people worked, and how the two things interacted with predictable and exploitable regularity, had spent the last 4 months gathering those threads. He had all of them now. Every single one. He looked down at the notebook, turned to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote 4 names. Then beneath each name, he wrote 2 words. Already mine. He closed the notebook. The house was silent around him. The city was dark below. The bourbon sat untouched. Dominic Cross, dying, betrayed, and completely in control of every variable that mattered, leaned back in his chair and allowed himself a single, quiet, absolutely private moment of something that was not quite satisfaction. Not yet. Satisfaction was for when it was finished. But close. Something close to it. He closed his eyes. He thought about what came next. Everything he thought, everything comes next. Then he opened his eyes, opened the notebook, and went back to work. He had 6 months. He would use every single hour. And when the time came, When his enemies were assembled and confident and completely blind, Dominic Cross would walk into the trap they built for him, knowing every inch of it, because he had designed it himself. The architect's tools. A dying man has two choices. He can spend what remains of his time grieving what he is losing, or he can spend it building what he wants to leave behind. Dominic Cross had never been a man who grieved. He built, and in the 8 months between his diagnosis and the night he signed his will, he built the most important thing of his entire career. Not a territory, not a business, not a legal structure. A mechanism. A machine made of information, legal precision, and human psychology, designed to run perfectly in his absence. But every machine needs tools. The first tool was a man named Thomas Reed. Dominic had found him through 3 separate intermediaries, each unaware of the others, a chain of careful introductions that left no traceable connection between Reed and the Cross organization. Reed was 40 years old, a former federal forensic accountant who had left government service after a principled disagreement with his superiors about prosecutorial ethics. He was sharp, discreet, and most critically, completely unknown to anyone in Dominic's inner circle. He was also, Dominic had concluded after extensive background research, genuinely honest. The kind of honest that had cost him his career rather than compromise it. Dominic had sent him a handwritten letter, no name, no return address, an offer of life-changing money for a specific, detailed task. Thomas Reed had accepted. The second tool was Sira Nakamura, 32 years old, cybersecurity specialist. She had been monitoring the digital communications of all 4 Inner Circle members for 11 months, working from a location Dominic had never visited, communicating exclusively through encrypted channels. Her reports, comprehensive, time-stamped, forensically precise, arrived weekly like quiet bombs. She had never met any of them. They had no idea she existed. The third tool was attorney Victor Price. 67, semi-retired, the most respected estate lawyer in the state, with an impeccable reputation and absolutely no connection to organized crime. The last person anyone would expect Dominic Cross to employ, which was precisely the point. Victor Price was given one task: build a will of such extraordinary legal complexity and precision that no challenge from any attorney at any level could break it. He described it, privately and with professional admiration, as the most sophisticated testamentary document he had encountered in 40 years of practice. He asked no questions about the broader context. Dominic paid him very well not to. The fourth tool was not a person. It was an envelope, cream-colored, sealed with black wax, containing a single handwritten letter that was not part of the will, something more personal, more important, more dangerous than any legal document. It sat in the top drawer of Dominic's desk for 3 months, beside a photograph. The photograph showed a young woman, 26, dark-eyed, laughing at something off camera. She had his jaw, his stillness, his way of being completely present in a moment. Her name was Nadia Reyes. She was a teacher in South Caro. She had a small apartment, a literature degree, a tabby cat. She paid her bills carefully. She asked good questions. She didn't know her father existed. She was about to inherit everything. Dominic looked at the photograph every morning. Not from sentiment. He was honest with himself about this. From necessity. Because on the mornings when the pain was bad and the medication made his hands shake, and the weight of what he was carrying threatened to become something he couldn't manage, the photograph reminded him why precision mattered. Why none of this could be done carelessly. Why every tool had to be perfect. Because the person who was going to receive everything he was building deserved tools that worked. He owed her that much. He owed her considerably more than that. But tools were what he had. So tools is what he built. The performance of a lifetime. 6 months before the night of the signed will, Dominic Cross called his inner circle together and delivered the greatest performance of his life. Not the most dangerous thing he had ever done, not the most complex, but the one that required the specific, exhausting courage of a man who must sit across from his betrayers and show them nothing while seeing everything. They gathered in the formal dining room, long dark table, candlelight, the smell of expensive food and old power, Marcus to his left, Helena to his right, Raymond across the table, eyes slightly averted, Father Eli at the far end, hands folded, face arranged into pastoral concern. 4 people who were planning to destroy him. Dominic entered last. He walked slightly slower than usual, a calibrated detail. Not so slow it alarmed them, just slow enough to plant a seed. The seed of he is declining. He sat. He looked around the table with the warmth of a man greeting his most trusted family. "I wanted us here," he said, "because there are things we need to discuss about the future." The room went very still. Stillness, Dominic had always believed, was more revealing than reaction. He watched each of them in that stillness with the practiced attention of a man who had spent 4 decades reading rooms. Marcus became too controlled, the control of someone suppressing good news. Helena's eyes moved briefly to the middle distance, already calculating. Raymond looked up from the table for the first time all evening. Father Eli said, "Of course, Dominic, your health always comes first." "You beautiful lying snake," Dominic thought, and smiled. "I've been experiencing some fatigue," he said. "My doctor recommends I consider delegating more, begin thinking about transition." He paused. "In the longer term." He watched what the word transition did to each of them. It was like dropping a stone into still water. The ripples were immediate, invisible to anyone not watching for them, and completely unmistakable to someone who was. For 3 hours they discussed business, normal business, quarterly accounts, territory disputes, political complications, all of it ordinary on the surface, all of it fundamentally altered by the word transition sitting in the middle of the table like a lit fuse. After the meeting, Father Eli lingered. "Brother," his voice was warm and careful, "are you truly all right?" Dominic looked at him, at the genuine concern layered over the hidden calculation, at the man he had protected for 59 years looking at him with love that was real and betrayal that was also real, and the specific human tragedy of both things being true simultaneously. "I'm managing," Dominic said. A hand on his shoulder, warm, "I love you." Dominic allowed himself one real moment, 1 second of unguarded feeling, folded immediately away. "I know you do," he said. After Eli left, Dominic sat alone at the long table. Asta appeared with water and medication, set them down, said nothing. "How did it go?" Asta asked. "Exactly as it needed to," Dominic said. Which meant the trap had its first walls. And every one of them had walked inside without knowing. The WILL and its hidden teeth. The Will Victor price drafted was, on its surface, everything the inner circle expected. Marcus received control of primary territory. Helena received the financial infrastructure. Raymond received operations and his debts cleared. Father Eli received the estate and a parish endowment. Clean, generous. Exactly what each of them had been quietly, hungrily anticipating. Dominic had made sure they knew through carefully managed leaks, through conversations just transparent enough to feel accidental, the broad outlines of what was coming to them. He had fed their expectations deliberately, the way you feed an animal into a trap, slowly, patiently, until they were so comfortable they stopped looking at the ground beneath their feet. They should have looked at the ground. Because beneath the surface provisions, Victor Price had buried clauses of devastating precision. Clause 7 established a trust, managed entirely by Thomas Reed, unknown to the inner circle. invisible in the document's architecture unless you knew exactly where to look. The trust held a specific set of financial records. Upon Dominic's death, those records would be reviewed, and if they met certain criteria, and they would, because Dominic had spent 8 months ensuring they would, transferred immediately to the relevant legal authorities. Clause 12 required every beneficiary to pass a forensic audit of their financial conduct before their inheritance activated. Any beneficiary who failed the audit forfeited everything. Those assets would redirect to the trust. Thomas Reed would conduct the audit. Clause 15 contained a condition that could retroactively void any inheritance if evidence emerged of conspiracy against the testator in the period preceding death. Sira Nakamura's 11 months of surveillance had generated sufficient evidence to trigger this clause multiple times over. Clause 19 was the one that would detonate everything. The primary heir, the person who inherited not a portion but everything, all legitimate holdings, all financial structures, all real estate, all business interests, was not Marcus, not Helena, not Raymond, not Father Eli. It was Nadia Reyes, named explicitly, with DNA verification filed in a sealed court document 3 months prior, legally unimpeachable. And Nadia had one additional power, written in language Victor Price had spent 2 days crafting to be bulletproof: the power to release or withhold the financial records held in the trust. The power, in practical terms, to destroy or protect every person connected to the Cross Empire. Dominic had given this power to a 26-year-old teacher who didn't know he existed. He had thought about this for a long time. He had concluded it was right because of one thing, one quality he had observed in Nadia from a careful distance over 2 years of watching her. She was good, not naive, not soft, good in the specific, difficult sense of a person who does the right thing even when the wrong thing is easier, who tells the truth even when a comfortable lie is available. He had seen it in small moments, the way she handled a difficult student, the way she navigated a neighborhood dispute, the way she balanced honesty and kindness without sacrificing either. He believed she was good. He hoped with everything he had left that he was right. The invitation into the fire. 3 months before the night of the signed will, Victor Calloway made his move. It arrived through Marcus, as Dominic had known it would, because Marcus was the connection. Marcus was the bridge. Marcus had been building toward this moment for 6 months and believed he was the architect of it. He was not the architect. He was the messenger. The proposal was elegant in its framing. A summit meeting, neutral ground, small delegations, an opportunity to discuss the future structure of business interests in the Cairo region. No threats, no ultimatums, the language of reasonable men conducting reasonable business. The reality: come and accept your diminishment, or we will create the instability that forces it anyway. Dominic read the proposal once, set it down, picked up his pen and wrote 2 words in the margin. Perfect timing. He sent his acceptance immediately. Marcus, informed of the decision, was carefully, professionally pleased. He managed the pleasure well, he always did, but Dominic watched the micro-expressions, the small tells that a lifetime of reading people had made completely legible. The slight loosening around the eyes. The breath held a half-second too long before releasing. The specific quality of a man trying not to smile. This is the right move, Marcus said. Given the circumstances, the organization needs stability. It does, Dominic agreed. Stability is everything. He watched Marcus leave. 19 years, Dominic thought. 19 years and you still can't hide it when you think you're winning. He opened his notebook, turned to a fresh page. Wrote Phase 2, the lion enters the den. Then beneath it, a single line that captured everything, the audacity, the strategy, the specific genius of what he was doing. They built the trap. I designed it. Now I walk in. He closed the notebook, picked up the phone, called Thomas Reed. 6 weeks, he said. Be ready. I'm ready now, Reed said. Good, Dominic thought. So am I. Father Eli's confession. There was one night Dominic had not planned for. One variable his extraordinary, meticulous, exhaustive planning had not fully accounted for. Not because he hadn't anticipated the possibility, but because he had underestimated the specific weight of what it would feel like when it actually happened. Father Eli Cross came to the estate at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, unannounced, alone. Asta let him in without question. Eli had always had access, always for 59 years, through everything. He came into the study and sat down without being invited, which he had not done in 20 years. He looked like a man carrying something that had finally become too heavy. Dominic set down his documents, gave his brother his full attention. I need to tell you something, Eli said. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 5 seconds. To both of them, it felt considerably longer. There are people, Eli started, stopped, started again. People have been approaching me about the organization, about what comes after you. His voice was very controlled and the control was costing him visibly. I want you to know that Eli. One word, quiet, absolute. Eli stopped. How long? Dominic asked. His brother stared at him. You know. How long? The answer came like a confession from the deepest room of a person, the room they keep locked even from themselves. 2 years. Dominic nodded, said nothing. And Calloway? He asked. Eli closed his eyes. When he opened them, there was something in his face that Dominic recognized as relief, the specific relief of a man who has been carrying a secret so long that exposure feels like oxygen. He approached me through intermediaries. He said after you were gone, if I was positioned correctly, I could be a stabilizing force. He made it sound like it was for the good of the city. He made it sound however he needed it to sound, Dominic said, to make you say yes. Silence. Yes, Eli said. Dominic stood, moved to the window. The city below, amber lights, dark river, the ordinary beauty of a place that had no idea what was being decided inside this room. The cancer was present tonight, a grinding pressure behind his ribs that the medication only partially addressed. He breathed through it without showing it. Why are you telling me now? He asked. A long pause, then very quietly, because you're my brother. Dominic stayed at the window. He thought about the bedroom they had shared as boys, the coat he had given Eli in winter, the seminary school he had funded, 59 years of complicated, imperfect, genuine love running underneath everything like a current. Go home, Eli, he said finally. Dominic, go home, say mass, do your work. A pause, and trust me. The sound of a chair, footsteps, the door opening. I'm sorry, Eli said. I know you are. The door closed. Dominic stood at the window for a very long time. Then he went to his desk, opened his notebook, and made one small adjustment to the plan. One adjustment. But it would matter more than almost anything else when the end came. The report that changed everything. 4 weeks before the night of the signed will, Seira Nakamura's report arrived at 3 in the morning. 72 pages. Dominic read all of them. By page 40, he was very still. By page 60, he understood that the situation had changed, not in its fundamentals, but in its urgency, in its specific danger. Marcus and Helena had met, together, privately, at a location that Seira had identified through cross-referencing 3 separate data streams. They had met and they had made an agreement. Not to wait for Dominic to die of cancer. To accelerate the timeline. The summit, the meeting Dominic had agreed to attend in 2 weeks, was not merely a negotiation. It had been structured, with Marcus's direct assistance as something else entirely. The Callaway security personnel assigned to the location had been specifically selected. The limitation of Dominic's protective capacity, the small delegation format, was not a reasonable security measure. It was a kill box. Dominic read this section twice. He noted his own physical response, a slight increase in breathing quickly controlled. Not fear, something adjacent to it. The body's automatic response to confirmed mortal threat, overridden by the mind within seconds. He read the section about Father Eli. Marcus and Helena had not included Eli in the real plan. They had used him as a political asset, a public face for the aftermath, without ever giving him the full picture. They had never trusted him, never intended to. Dominic thought about Eli coming to the study, the wet eyes, the shame. They used him and told him nothing, Dominic thought. They treated my brother as a prop. He felt something then that he did not permit himself to examine too closely. Something that was part anger and part grief, and part of fierce, cold protectiveness that had nothing to do with strategy. He set the report down, picked up his phone, sent 3 words to a number only one person had. Move up timeline. Then he opened his notebook to the final page of planning and began writing with the focused intensity of a man who understands that the margin for error has just been reduced to 0. He wrote for 2 hours. When he finished, he reviewed everything. Thomas Reed ready. Evidence packages complete. Legal filings in position. The letter to Nadia sealed in the drawer. Nadia herself, contacted, briefed by Price, in possession of the documents. Every piece in place. Every thread connected. They had built a kill box, Dominic thought. Good. He would walk into it, and the walls would fall inward on everyone but him. The heir who didn't know she was one. Nadia Rios almost threw the letter away. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, a cream envelope delivered by a courier who rang her buzzer at 7 a.m. and left without explanation. No return address. Wax seal. The handwriting on the front precise and old-fashioned, like something from a different century. She stood in her doorway in her teaching clothes with her coffee going cold, and looked at it for a long moment. She almost put it directly in the recycling. Something stopped her. She sat at her kitchen table. Raskolnikov, her tabby, named for the Dostoevsky character, walked across her lesson plans and settled on her feet. She broke the wax seal carefully and unfolded the letter inside. She read it 3 times. Then she sat very still for a very long time. The letter did not name the sender. It told her she was about to receive important information about her origins, that an attorney named Victor Price would contact her, that she should read everything carefully before making any decisions. It told her in a single restrained sentence that she would read many times in the weeks that followed. What is coming to you is large. You are larger than it. I believe this completely. She did not know what to make of it. She went to school. She taught her classes with her customary precision and patience. She came home and fed Raskolnikov and made dinner and sat at her table and thought about the letter for a long time. Victor Price arrived 10 days later. He sat in her small living room with his briefcase and his careful hands and explained, with complete professional composure, that she was the primary beneficiary of a significant estate, that the documentation establishing her biological connection to the estate's originator was sealed in the folder he had placed on her coffee table. She opened it. DNA verification. Court sealed. A trust established in her name 7 years ago. It had been funding her scholarship, her apartment, certain expenses she had always attributed to her own careful management. A summary of the estate she stood to inherit. And a photograph. A man in his mid-40s, dark-haired, a quality of absolute stillness about him that she recognized uneasily in the mirror. She looked at the photograph for a long time. "He's dying," she said. "Yes," Price said. "Did he want to meet me?" Price was quiet for a moment. He decided against it. "Why?" He believed it would make your decisions harder. He wanted you to have a clear head. She thought about this, about a man choosing to stay away from his own daughter to protect her from complexity, the specific discipline of that restraint, the specific loneliness of it. "What kind of man does that?" she said, not a question directed at Price, a question directed at the photograph. She picked up the folder. "Tell me everything," she said. She was ready. She just didn't know yet how ready she actually was. The night of the SIGNED will. 11:31 p.m. The estate was completely silent. Dominic Cross sat at his desk and looked at the document in front of him, the will, final version, reviewed and notarized and legally unimpeachable. Victor Price had delivered it 10 days ago. Thomas Reed had confirmed every mechanism was operational. Sira Nakamura had confirmed all surveillance was current and documented. Everything was in place. All that remained was his signature. His hands were shaking tonight, not from emotion, from the disease. The tremor had been gradually worsening for 3 weeks. Dr. Marsh had adjusted his medication twice. It was manageable. He picked up the pen with the deliberate firmness of a man who has decided that what his body does is not permitted to be a verdict on what his mind can accomplish. He signed his name. Dominic Cross. One final time. In the precise, old-fashioned script that had signed 1,000 documents and 200 orders and 1 letter to a young woman with dark eyes who deserved better than the inheritance she was about to receive. And who was, he believed with everything he had left, capable of making it into something better anyway. He set the pen down, looked at the signature. 41 years, 1,000 decisions, 100,000 consequences, a city shaped partly, incompletely, expensively by this one name. He folded the document, placed it in the file, sealed it. Then he opened the top drawer and took out the cream envelope. The letter to Nadia, 3 months in this drawer. 3 months of him picking it up and setting it down and asking himself whether it was the right thing, whether it helped or complicated, whether a dying father's words to a daughter he had never met were a gift or an imposition. He had concluded they were both, and that both was acceptable. He placed the envelope on top of the will file. Then he picked up the photograph. He looked at her, the laugh, the dark eyes, the complete unawareness of the camera, of him, of everything that was about to change in her life. He spoke to her, once, quietly, in the empty study where no one could hear. "I'm sorry I wasn't there," he said. "I made decisions that seemed right and I'm not certain they were." A pause. "But I'm trying to make the last ones count, in the only way I know how." He looked at her a moment longer. "You're going to surprise yourself," he said. "I've watched you long enough to know that." He put the photograph back, closed the drawer, picked up his phone, sent one message to Asta. "Tomorrow we go." He set the phone down, took his medication, sat in the silence of the study for a while among the books and the decisions and the decades, and breathed. Tomorrow he would walk into the lion's den. Tomorrow, everything he had built for 8 months would either hold or break. He was not afraid. He was ready. The lion's den. The estate was 30 miles outside Cairo. Neutral ground, the kind of neutral ground that means something in the world of serious men who have agreed, for the duration of a single meeting, to observe the fiction of equal footing. The property was large, isolated, and the security arrangements had been structured, as Marcus had confirmed in his encrypted communications to Calloway, to limit the Cross delegation's capacity to respond to unexpected developments. Dominic stepped out of the car into the cold autumn air. He looked at the building, assessed it the way he assessed every space he entered, exits, sightlines, the positioning of Calloway's security personnel, the specific architecture of the trap. He knew it all already. Sierra's surveillance had given him the floor plan, the personnel list, the security arrangement 3 days ago. He knew exactly where every wall was. He walked inside. Victor Calloway came to meet him in the entrance hall, 50 years old, lean, with the carefully constructed warmth of a man who had decided charm was more efficient than intimidation. He extended his hand. Dominic shook it. He studied Calloway's face with 40 years of practiced attention. Smart, genuinely smart, controlled. The eyes of a man who had already concluded this meeting was a formality, that the outcome was determined before Dominic sat down. "Mr. Cross," Calloway said, "thank you for coming." "Mr. Calloway," Dominic said, "thank you for the invitation." They went inside. The meeting proceeded as expected. Calloway's artful presentation of market conditions, succession challenges, regional stability. The language of business wrapped around the reality of surrender terms. 40 minutes of careful, professional theater. Marcus sat at Dominic's left and said very little, but his silence had a specific quality, the silence of a man waiting for his cue, counting down. 40 minutes in, Calloway arrived at the proposal. Transfer of Northern and Eastern Territories, management agreement for financial infrastructure, a consulting arrangement for remaining operations, framed generously, designed to humiliate. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "This seems like a reasonable framework, Dominic, given a careful pause, given everything." Dominic looked at Marcus. He held his gaze for a long, measured moment. Then he reached into his jacket and produced a document, set it on the table. "Before we discuss terms," Dominic said, "I'd like to put something on the table." He watched Calloway's eyes move to the document, the slight forward lean of one of his advisors. "3 months ago," Dominic said, "I became aware that members of my organization had been in contact with your representatives for an extended period." He did not look at Marcus. He looked at Calloway. "I became aware of the leverage applied to Raymond Cho, the arrangement with Marcus Vale, the purpose of this meeting." The room was completely still. "What I would like you to understand," Dominic continued in the same quiet, conversational tone, "is that I came here knowing all of this. Voluntarily. I chose to walk into the room you built for me." Calloway's expression had not changed, but something behind it had. "This meeting is being recorded," Dominic said. "Full audio and video, transmitted in real time to a secure location. The document I've placed on the table is a summary of evidence currently held in a legally structured trust. Evidence of financial fraud, territory violations, and conspiracy to commit murder." He slid the document across to Calloway. "Read it." Calloway read it. Marcus had turned, in Dominic's peripheral vision, a very specific shade of gray. "What do you want?" Calloway asked. His voice was carefully controlled, but underneath it the first real crack. "Nothing from you," Dominic said. "This conversation is concluded. My attorneys will handle what follows." He pushed back his chair, stood. Jarrett materialized at his shoulder. "I came here today so that this room and your faces in this moment would be part of the permanent record." He turned toward the door. "Dominic," Marcus's voice, stripped of everything. Dominic stopped, looked at him. 19 years, he said quietly. "And you chose this." A pause. "That's not my failure, Marcus, that's yours." He walked out. Into the cold autumn air. Into the rain that had just begun to fall. And behind him, the walls of the trap closed. Exactly as designed. By the man who had just walked through them. The unraveling. Marcus called Calloway 17 minutes after Dominic's car left. Calloway did not answer. Marcus called again, 4 minutes later. Nothing. A third call. Silence. And in that silence, absolute, devastating, final Marcus Vale understood everything. That the man who had been his partner had already recalculated. That in the 40 minutes since Dominic Cross walked out of that room with a recording and a file and that quiet, terrible smile, Victor Calloway had looked at the new landscape and concluded that Marcus was now a liability. And Victor Calloway did not carry liabilities. Marcus drove. He moved fast, go bag, floor safe, 3 passports, 40 minutes to the airport. The specific, focused movement of a man whose survival instincts have overridden everything else. He was at the check-in counter when the audit flag triggered. The tripwire Thomas Reed had embedded 6 weeks ago, invisible, patient, waiting, activated the moment Marcus initiated his offshore transfer from the airport parking lot. Within 3 minutes, Reed had the notification. Within 11 minutes, the relevant authorities had the first evidence package. Marcus was detained at the gate. He sat in the chair they offered him and said, very quietly, "I want an attorney." He did not resist. Dominic had known he wouldn't. Marcus was not stupid. He knew an indefensible position when he was standing in one. Helena Voss received the news through a courthouse contact and responded with the precision of someone who had been mentally preparing a defense for months. She called 3 lawyers simultaneously. She began building her case with extraordinary speed and intelligence. But Clause 12 was already running. And Thomas Reed's audit was not looking at the obvious misconduct. It was looking at everything. 7 years of deliberate financial sabotage, investments rooted to fail, value systematically destroyed. The empire bled from within by the very person entrusted to protect it. When Reed had first presented this to Dominic, Dominic had been quiet for a long time. She wasn't just stealing, he had said. She wanted it to fail. Yes, Reed had confirmed. Dominic had sat with that. Then put all of it in the report, every decision, the full picture. Raymond Cho sat across a small table from Dominic's representative and wept quietly into his coffee and signed the cooperation agreement without negotiation. His debts cleared. His future returned. He told them everything. What Raymond knew, the operational intelligence, the communication protocols, the specific contacts within the Calloway organization, completed the case in ways the recording alone could never have achieved. Raymond was the final piece. Dominic had always known he would be. By midnight, the mechanisms were fully engaged, evidence packages in motion, legal filings being processed. 4 people who had spent 2 years building toward a throne were sitting in various stages of exposure and collapse. And Dominic Cross was home. In his study, among his books. He took his medication. He sat in the silence. He thought about Nadia, whether she had read the letter yet, whether she was frightened or ready or both. He thought she was probably both. He thought that was exactly right. He closed his eyes. The trap had closed. Every piece had held. Now there was only one thing left. To finish. The priest. Father Eli Cross came to the estate every day in the final week. He didn't discuss Marcus's detention or Helena's legal proceedings or the news reports that were beginning to surface. Careful, controlled disclosures that Dominic's attorneys were managing with precision. He came and sat with his brother, and sometimes they talked about small things, and sometimes they sat in silence, and both of those things were, in their own way, everything. On the 4th day, Dominic said, "They didn't tell you the full plan." Eli was very still. The summit, what they intended to happen there. Dominic looked at him steadily. You were their public face, their legitimacy. They used you without giving you the real picture. I know, Eli said quietly. You knew before, too. You just couldn't admit it to yourself. Eli looked at his hands. They were the hands of a man who had spent 30 years in service, baptisms, funerals, hospital visits, the physical work of faith. Strong hands, tired hands. "What happens to me?" he asked. "Nothing," Dominic said. Eli looked up. "Your conduct was not criminal. The investigators have your name and nothing actionable." A pause. "I made sure of that." The silence that followed was the longest of the week. "Why?" Eli asked. Just the one word. But it held everything: the guilt, the disbelief, the specific weight of being shown grace you didn't earn. Dominic was quiet for a moment. "Because you came to me," he said. "When you didn't have to, you came and told me the truth." He paused. "That matters. It has always mattered." Eli bent his head. His shoulders shook once, briefly, and stilled. When he looked up, Dominic said, "There's something else, in the will." He explained about Nadia. Eli listened to all of it without speaking. When Dominic finished, the room was very quiet. "A niece," Eli said, as if measuring the word for the first time. "She's going to need people," Dominic said. "People who know this city, who know the history. She's walking into something enormous, and I can give her the legal framework, but not," he stopped. "Not family, not someone who was there for all of it, that I can only give her through you." "If she wants it," Eli said. "If she wants it," Dominic agreed. "The choice will be hers." Eli came every day until the last day. On the last day, he administered last rites in the quiet of the bedroom, not because Dominic had ever been devout, but because Eli needed to give him something, and this was what he had. He held his brother's hand and prayed in the low, steady voice he used for dying parishioners, and Dominic lay in the dim light and let the words move through him without resistance. It was the most honest thing either of them had ever given the other. A dying man and his brother. 59 years distilled into one quiet room. And the rain outside, falling the way it always fell in Cairo, hard, indifferent, and somehow also like grace. Nadia and the envelope. Victor Price delivered the cream envelope on a Thursday morning. He placed it on Nadia's coffee table, told her it was a personal communication outside the formal will proceedings, and left her alone with it. She sat for a long time before opening it. Raskolnikov settled in her lap. She absently stroked his ears. She had spent the past weeks in controlled disorientation, legal briefings, financial summaries, meetings with Reed whose precision she had immediately respected. She understood technically what she was inheriting. But understanding something technically and understanding it truly are different things. She broke the wax seal, unfolded the single sheet inside. "Read it." She read it twice. Then she set it down and sat very still and breathed. The letter did not justify, did not apologize in the way of people who think words undo actions. It was honest about what he had built, what it had cost, what he was giving her and why, and what she was free to do with it. One section she read 3 times. "The power you now hold is yours completely. If you choose differently than I intended, I will not, from wherever I am, be angry with you. I will understand. I built something enormous, and much of it is complicated and some of it is wrong. You can change it. That is why I am leaving it to you." She thought about what kind of person writes that sentence. A person who has spent their whole life controlling everything, and who, at the end, chooses to give the control away. Who trusts someone they have never spoken to with everything they have ever built. She thought that this was either the bravest thing she had ever heard of, or the most complicated apology in history, or both. She picked up her phone, called Victor Price. "I have questions," she said, "about the secondary clauses." "Of course," he said, "whenever you're ready." "Now," she said, "I'm ready now." She was. More ready than she knew. More ready, perhaps, than even Dominic had fully understood. The last morning. Dominic Cross died on a Tuesday. 6:43 in the morning. The bedroom was dim, curtains half drawn, the gray light of a November dawn moving quietly through the gaps. The rain had stopped sometime in the night, and the world outside was very still. Asta was in the corner chair where he had been sleeping for 5 days. Father Eli was beside the bed. Both of them had been there since 3 a.m., when the breathing had changed in a way that required no medical expertise to understand. Dominic was conscious until close to the end, not fully present, but interior, deep inside himself, the specific inwardness of a person who is completing something private. At some point in the early morning, very clearly, he said, "The books. Make sure she gets the books." "I'll make sure," Asta said. A pause, the faintest trace of something that might have been humor. "And the good bourbon, don't waste it." Eli made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. A little while later, without opening his eyes, "Eli. I'm here. Is it raining?" Eli looked at the window. The glass was still wet from the night's rain, running in slow rivulets down the pane. The rain stopped, but the window still has it. A long silence. "Good," Dominic said, very quietly. "I like rain." These were the last clear words. At 6:43, the breathing changed one final time. Eli held his brother's hand and prayed. Asta stood at the foot of the bed and was very still and looked at the window where the rain had been. At 6:48, it was over. The room held the silence the way a church holds silence, not empty, but full of something that doesn't have a precise name. Eli kept his brother's hand for a while. Then he placed it carefully on the covers, stood, and looked at Dominic's face. Still pale, finally, without the weight it had carried every single day of his life. "Now what?" Asta said to the window. "Now we carry it forward," Eli said. He reached for his phone, called Victor Price, and the machine Dominic Cross had built with 8 months of dying began quietly and irrevocably to run. The mechanisms activated the moment the death certificate was filed. Not with drama, not with noise, with the quiet, irreversible precision of a machine that has been calibrated by a master and left to run. Clause 7 triggered first, the trust, the financial records, Thomas Reed receiving the automatic notification that his role had formally begun. He was at his desk within 20 minutes, coffee untouched, working with the focused intensity of a man who understood that the quality of his work here was the final measure of the faith someone had placed in him. Clause 12 followed the behavioral audit, formally initiated, every beneficiary's financial history now subject to Reed's forensic examination. For Marcus, already detained, this was almost academic. For Helena, still fighting, it was the deepest wall of the trap, the one that examined not just the obvious misconduct but the full 7 years of deliberate sabotage. Helena's attorneys were brilliant. They challenged every clause. They filed motions with speed and precision and genuine legal creativity. Victor Price had built the document to survive exactly this. It survived. Clause 15, the conspiracy provision, produced the most significant immediate consequences. The summit recording, combined with Sierra's surveillance documentation, established conspiracy beyond any reasonable legal threshold. 4 people, 2 years, fully documented. Calloway's attorneys attempted to challenge the recording's admissibility. The challenge failed. Dominic's legal team had anticipated every argument. Clause 19 activated last, the designation of Nadia Reyes as primary heir, DNA verified, court sealed, legally unimpeachable. The inner circle's attorneys, Marcus's, Helena's, the representatives of Father Eli's interests, even Calloway's team, all encountered the same document, the same clauses, the same impenetrable legal architecture. And all of them reached the same conclusion. The man had built a wall they couldn't climb. Victor Calloway was arrested 8 days after Dominic's death. The recording from the summit was the foundation. Raymond's cooperation built the walls. 11 months of Sierra's surveillance furnished the roof. The structure was complete and unassailable. Calloway received 18 years. Marcus cooperated fully with prosecutors once his attorney explained that the alternative was considerably worse. His cooperation strengthened the Calloway case substantially. He received 8 years. He served 5. He read a great deal by all accounts. Helena fought everything. For 3 years she fought, brilliantly and expensively and without ever quite accepting that the ground was gone from under her. She lost. She paid. She left the country. She was not heard from in Cairo again. 4 people. 4 betrayals. 4 falls. Each one calibrated precisely to the nature of what they had done. Each one designed 8 months ago by a dying man with a notebook and a pen, and 41 years of understanding exactly how power and consequence work. Each one inevitable. Each one complete. An ADIA's choice. The question everyone in Cairo's legal world was quietly asking, whether Nadia Reyes would use her power to halt the proceedings, was answered in 3 weeks. She spent those 3 weeks doing what she always did when facing something complex. She gathered information, examined it carefully, and thought. She reread the briefing file. She met with Reed twice. She asked not about legal implications but about human ones. What would happen to the people named in the filings, whether the consequences were proportional to the actions, whether the mechanism her father had built was justice or revenge. Thomas Reed answered her questions with complete honesty. He had the distinct impression during those meetings that he was being evaluated, not for his competence, which she had already assessed, but for his character. He found he didn't mind. She went to the estate and walked through it alone. She spent 2 hours in the study. She picked up books at random, found the marginalia, penciled notes in that precise handwriting, filling the margins of 1,000 pages. Questions, disagreements, observations, arguments with dead philosophers, moments of genuine delight at an idea encountered for the first time. She read the marginalia for a long time. This, she thought, is who he was. Not the empire, not the power, not even the plan. This, a man alone with books, arguing with ideas, filling margins with his thinking because the thinking needed somewhere to go. She sat at his desk. She called Thomas Reed. "I'm not halting the proceedings," she said. "The evidence goes where he designed it to go." "Understood," Reed said. "But I have 2 modifications. The first, Raymond Cho's cooperation would be formally and publicly acknowledged in the court record. His role would be clearly distinguished from the others. He would not be buried in the same filing as the people who had acted out of greed." Reed was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's a good modification." The second concerned Father Eli. A notation in the formal filings acknowledging his disclosure to Dominic before the legal proceedings. A small thing legally, a significant thing humanly. The difference between a man who betrayed and a man who chose, at the critical moment, to tell the truth. She called Eli after. "He wanted me to take care of you," she said. "I'm still figuring out what that means." "So am I," Eli said. A pause. "Coffee," she said. "Next week, maybe." A longer pause. She could hear something in it. Relief, gratitude, the cautious hope of a man who is being offered more than he deserves and knows it. "Yes," Eli said, "I'd like that very much." She hung up and sat in her small apartment with Raskolnikov in her lap and thought about what it meant to inherit something broken and choose anyway to build what Cairo became. In the months after Dominic Cross's death, Cairo changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, in the way real change always happens, gradually, then undeniably, then permanently. The Cross estate became the registered address of the Reyes Foundation, named for Nadia's mother, publicly governed, financially transparent, programs covering educational scholarships, small business support in South Cairo, and a legal aid clinic that quietly and effectively helped hundreds of families navigate systems that had never been designed with them in mind. The legitimate businesses continued, most of them strengthened under Reed's oversight and Nadia's direction, which was precise and patient and occasionally surprised people who expected someone inheriting this much to be either arrogant or overwhelmed. She was neither. She was simply her father's daughter. The less legitimate aspects of the operation were wound down over 14 months, not carelessly, with provisions for the people affected, with transition support, with the specific kind of institutional care for human consequences that suggested the new director understood that an organization is people before it is anything else. Asta stayed. He had offered his service the morning after Dominic died, exactly as the letter had promised, and Nadia had looked at him for a long moment and said, "The letter said you were the most honest person he knew." "He was more honest than me," Asta said, "but I'll do." She kept him. She was right to. Raymond Cho opened a restaurant in the Western District, slow-cooked short rib, by multiple accounts the best in the city. He was a kind employer and a quiet presence in the neighborhood. He closed early on Tuesdays. No one knew why. No one asked. Father Eli's Sunday sermons changed, became more personal, more honest, more explicitly about the complexity of love and the genuine possibility of redemption, not the theoretical possibility, but the earned kind, the kind that costs something. His congregation noticed and received it with the particular attention people give to someone who is clearly speaking from a real place. He had coffee with Nadia every 2 weeks. The conversations lasted hours, invariably. They were both people who asked good questions and listened carefully to the answers. They were both people who had grown up without enough family and were learning, slowly and imperfectly, what having some again felt like. It felt, both of them had separately concluded, like something worth protecting. The city moved. The way cities always move. Forward imperfectly, carrying its history inside its present, and its future inside its choices. The hill. There's a hill above Caro. Most residents have never taken the road that leads to it. It is not marked. It does not appear on the tourist maps of a city that doesn't make much of tourism anyway. You find it by knowing it exists and then looking for the turn. Dominic Cross had gone there many times, always alone. 5 months after his death, on a late afternoon in spring, Nadia Reyes drove up to the hill and stood at its crest and looked at the city. Asta had told her about it. He had not offered to come. He understood without being told that this was something she needed to do alone. She stood in the mild spring air and looked at Caro spread below her. The river, the bridges, the old neighborhoods layered underneath the new ones, the towers, the church steeples, all of it, all the ordinary and extraordinary life of a city that didn't know and didn't need to know that it was being looked at by the daughter of the man who had shaped it more than almost anyone else alive. She thought about him. She thought about the marginalia, the letter, the photograph he had kept in his drawer, the trust established in her name 7 years ago, quietly funding her life while he watched from a distance and concluded from that distance that she was someone who could be trusted with everything. She thought about what it costs a person to watch from a distance, to decide that love, in certain circumstances, looks like absence, to believe that staying away is sometimes the most protective thing you can do. She wasn't sure she agreed with that decision, but she understood it. She understood it the way you understand something that comes from a place you recognize, a place of trying to protect people from what you are, from what you've built, from the consequences of a life that ran beyond the boundaries of what's clean. She thought he tried. She thought at the end he tried very hard. She thought that matters. It doesn't fix everything, but it matters. The city below her was beginning to light up, the amber of streetlights, the scattered brightness of windows, the slow and beautiful ignition of a city moving into evening. She thought about what she was building, the foundation, the scholarships, the legal clinic, the careful, patient unwinding of what needed to end and the careful, patient strengthening of what deserved to continue. She thought about how long it would take. A long time, she concluded. It will take a long time. Good. She had always been patient. She looked at the city until the light was fully changed, until Caro was a scatter of brightness in the dark, indifferent and beautiful, going about its life the way cities always do. Then she got back in the car, drove down the hill, back into the city that was, in ways she was still learning to understand, her inheritance, her responsibility, her home. What remains? In the records of Caro's civil courts, there is a will. Legal scholars cite it. A state attorney study it. Victor Price, now fully retired, lectures on it at law schools under an anonymized case study title. His students invariably find it remarkable. He tells them it was the finest work of his career. He tells them it was designed by the client, not by him. He tells them that in 40 years of practice, he had never encountered a mind that understood legal architecture with that particular combination of precision and patience. He does not tell them the name. He doesn't need to. In the Financial Regulatory Archives, there are audit records representing some of the most thorough forensic work Thomas Reed has ever produced. He keeps one copy in his office, not as a trophy, as a reminder of what it looks like when someone trusts you completely and you rise to meet it. In the margins of thousands of books, there is a conversation, one man alone across 40 years, arguing with the greatest minds in history, asking questions, pushing back, refusing easy answers. The books live now in Nadia's apartment on shelves she had built specifically to hold them. She reads them. She adds her own marginalia in a different hand with different questions, but the same quality of attention. Two people in the same margins, decades apart. In a restaurant in the Western District, a man named Raymond makes short rib that people drive across the city for. He is content, which is more than he expected and perhaps more than he deserved, and he knows both of these things, and he tries to be worthy of it. In a church in the Northern District, a priest delivers sermons that have become, in the years since his brother's death, the most attended in the city. People come who have never been religious. They come because the man behind the pulpit speaks about failure and love and the possibility of being more than your worst choices with a specificity that feels earned. It is earned. In a foundation office in the hills above Caro, a woman arrives early every morning. She drinks her coffee and reads the overnight reports and asks sharp questions and listens carefully to the answers and makes decisions with a precision that surprises people who expected someone younger, someone less certain, someone who had not grown up in the same neighborhood as the father she never met and absorbed, from the very same streets, the same quality of attention to how things actually work. She is building something. It will take a long time. She is patient. She has her father's handwriting, a detail she discovered 6 months in, comparing a document she had signed to a document he had signed, 2 signatures side by side, the same precision, the same old-fashioned deliberateness. She looked at them for a long time. Then she went back to work. Because that is what you do. With an inheritance, with a name, with a city that is watching to see what you make of what you've been given. You go back to work. You build. You try to make the last choices better than the first ones, which is, perhaps, the only direction that has ever mattered. Dominic Cross died on a Tuesday in November. 63 years old. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He designed his own trap. He walked into it. He died exactly as planned. Every traitor fell. Every mechanism held. His legacy rose, not in bronze, not in fear, not in the kind of power that requires violence to maintain. In a woman on a hill looking at a city. In marginalia, in morning coffee between an uncle and a niece who are learning what family means, in a restaurant that closes early on Tuesdays, in a foundation named for a mother, in all the quiet, durable, impossible to destroy things that a man builds when he finally understands what building is actually for.